If you've heard that DJI drones are about to be banned in the US and you're feeling that wave of panic starting to hit, you're not alone. Here's the truth. DJI is not banned, at least not yet. But there is a very specific default ban mechanism tied to December 23rd that has people confused, worried, and trying to piece together information from many different sources. So in this video, I'm gonna bring everything into one place. What's real, what's proposed, and what absolutely isn't happening so you can understand exactly where things stand and whether your drone is suddenly at risk of falling into the sky like a Y2K flashback. Let's start here. No, your DJI drone isn't going to crash land on December 23rd. Think of this like Y2K. Remember when people thought the year 2000 would shut down every computer on Earth? That didn't happen, and this won't either. At least, not like that. With the proposed ban, it is directly linked to an FCC ban, which ultimately means this. The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, is a government agency responsible for regulating all communication infrastructure. This includes radio, television, internet, satellites, and wireless systems. While it doesn't control airspace or flight rules, that's the FAA's job, the FCC plays a crucial role in determining whether drones can legally operate in the United States. Specifically, it oversees the communication of wireless components inside the drones, like the radio transmitters, the receivers, and the video transmission systems. These are all used for remote control and live video feeds. Every drone in the US must receive an FCC equipment authorization to legally operate its wireless communication systems. Without that approval, a drone can't be sold, marketed, or activated for legal use. In 2021, the FCC created what's known as the covered list, which includes companies that are considered threats to national security. Companies like Huawei and ZTE were added to that list in early 2021. The implication is significant. Once a company is on the covered list, the FCC is prohibited by law from approving any new products from that company. That's why we haven't seen any Huawei or ZTE products since 2021. In DJI's case, this means that while existing drones already certified by the FCC remain legal to fly, no new DJI drones or even major hardware updates that require recertification can be legally approved moving forward. DJI can continue supporting older models for now, but it cannot introduce new drones into the US market unless they are removed from the covered list or an exemption is granted. Now look, DJI has not been added to this list, but it is on the chopping block to be added by default. And I'll explain how that came to be very shortly. Think of the FCC as a wireless TSA. Just like how airport security decides who can board a plane, the FCC decides which devices get to operate on American airwaves. If a company is flagged as a national security concern, its new devices won't even make it past the gate. That's the situation DJI is pending to be in. And it's the big reason why their future in the US drone market is uncertain. The effort to restrict or potentially ban DJI drones in the United States is being driven primarily by Congress, where concerns about Chinese technology and national security have gained broad bipartisan traction. One of the most visible figures leading this push is Representative Elise Stefanik, who has backed several bills aimed specifically at limiting DJI's presence in the US market. Among these is the Countering CCP Drones Act, which seeks to designate DJI as a security risk by placing it on federal restriction list and preventing its future products from gaining the approvals needed to be sold or operated legally in the United States. Stefanik and other lawmakers argue that because DJI is headquartered in China, it could be compelled under Chinese law to share data with the Chinese Communist Party, creating potential vulnerabilities if its drones operate in sensitive US environments. This wave of legislative pressure culminated in Section 5949 of the FY 2023 National Defense Authorization Act, also known as the NDAA, which effectively sets a deadline. If no US agency completes a formal security review of DJI by December 23rd of 2025, the company will be blocked by receiving new authorizations, resulting in a de facto ban on new DJI products. Critics do call this a ban by inaction, while supporters view it as a precautionary safeguard. Now look, the security concerns around DJI are nothing new. These concerns were amplified years earlier by independent cybersecurity findings. In 2017, researcher Kevin Finster uncovered significant vulnerabilities in DJI's cloud infrastructure, including unencrypted flight logs, exposed user data, and developer keys that could have been accessed by really anybody. Finster attempted to disclose these findings through DJI's bug bounty program, but disagreements over non-disclosure terms led him to just publish all of this information publicly. His report did not claim that DJI was engaging in espionage, but it did reveal several technical weaknesses that could hypothetically be exploited. These findings were later cited in congressional conversations, policy briefing, and national security discussions as evidence that DJI systems had insufficient protections at the time, especially considering how widely used they were among police departments, critical infrastructure teams, and emergency response units. Now look, that was from 2017, so there have been a lot of updates made since then. DJI has consistently rejected accusations that it poses a security threat to the United States. The company maintains that it is privately owned, not government controlled, and has repeatedly asserted that it does not share data with any government, including China. DJI emphasizes that it provides features such as local data mode, which fully disconnects a drone from outside communications, and that third-party audits have found no evidence of forced data transmission or intentional backdoors. Now look, I am not no cybersecurity expert, so I'm just taking it for what DJI has to say. DJI has also publicly welcomed a full US government security review and stated that it is willing to cooperate with whatever agencies may lead one. To date, no such review has been completed, leaving DJI in a position where its future in the US hinges not only on a conclusive technical evaluation, but on whether Congress and federal regulators act before the statutory deadline. DJI has repeatedly said it wants transparency and an evidence-based assessment, noting that it has never marketed its products for military use and does not collect data without user consent. Again, these are all DJI's words here. Now, the big elephant in the room. Behind the scenes, lobbying has shaped much of the conversation on actually both sides. Many in the industry point towards Skydio, one of the leading US drone manufacturers, which has invested heavily in advocating for domestic first procurement and higher cybersecurity standards for government operated drones. And I do see a benefit of that, regardless of whether that came directly from Skydio or not. Between 2020 and 2023, the company spent approximately $1.7 million on lobbying at a federal and state levels, including significant efforts here in Florida, where its advocacy contributed to restrictions on foreign-made drones used by police agencies, not private entities. Skydio publicly frames its involvement as an effort to strengthen American innovation, improve supply chain resilience, and ensure secure technology for public safety and defense. The company has not explicitly called for a blanket ban on DJI, but the policies it supports naturally shift government demand toward US-made systems and away from competitors, aka DJI. DJI, facing mounting legislative and regulatory pressure, significantly expanded its own lobbying presence in response. Between 2020 and 2024, the company spent an estimated $7.4 million on federal lobbying, hiring major Washington consulting firms, former congressional staffers, and even former US Attorney General Loretta Lynch. DJI also helped support the Drone Advocacy Alliance, a domestic-facing organization aimed at giving operators, many of whom rely heavily on DJI equipment, myself included, a platform to push back against the proposed bans. These efforts have focused on slowing or modifying legislation that could restrict DJI's access to US market, as well as countering narratives that its products inherently pose a security risk. Throughout the drone community, public reaction to the potential ban is strongly divided. Many commercial operators, independent filmmakers, hobbyists, and small businesses view DJI as the most capable and cost-effective solution available and see the ban as a politically motivated, economically disruptive, or lacking clear evidence. The argument is that there is no definitive proof that DJI has shown misused data or engaged in espionage on behalf of the Chinese government. On the other side, the supporters of the ban, including some defense contractors, public safety agencies, and national security analysts, believe it is safer to transition away from foreign-made systems in case theoretical risks become real over time. Even many of these supporters, however, acknowledge that domestic systems are often more expensive, less capable, or less mature than the DJI counterparts, which I just released a 3.5-hour documentary on showing what US-made systems capabilities are, and I do think it will surprise you on what my findings were. Here's the thing, most of the industry is a bit frustrated at what's going on. Operators like myself want clarity, evidence, and a formal security review before sweeping policy changes reshape the US drone ecosystem. Now here's where I stand on who's actually behind all of this. Logically, I completely understand the federal government's position on wanting agencies to move away from foreign-made hardware and software. From a national security standpoint, it makes sense. Russia isn't going to use US-made systems, and China certainly isn't either. So why should we rely on theirs for sensitive operations? Keyword, sensitive operations. But here's where the situation becomes a lose-lose. Yes, I personally have hundreds of thousands of dollars invested into DJI systems for my business. And while I can easily transition over to US-made drones and spend $10,000 to $20,000 on it, it is not fair to force private companies and independent operators to switch simply because the government wants to change what it wants to use internally. Just like we have the freedom to choose whatever phones or computers we want to buy, we should also have the freedom to choose the drones we want to operate, especially in the private sector. When it comes to military, law enforcement, and critical infrastructure work, I do believe transitioning to domestically built systems is the right move. That's a different level of responsibility and exposure. And yes, it's going to take some time for US manufacturers to catch up. That's the reality of the situation. And we need to separate government-level security decisions from private sector freedom of choice, something where I think most of us really sit in. Moving into 2026, the US drone landscape is going to look very different depending on what actually happens on December 23rd. So let's talk about the options you realistically have right now. I've personally been purchasing newer DJI systems like the Mini 5 Pro and the Neo 2, and enterprise models like the M400 that I have behind me ahead of the deadline. If the de facto ban does go into effect as currently written, the systems you buy right now will still be completely fine to keep flying. For the past year, I've been getting all my systems through DroneWorks, not because this is sponsored, but because their service has been phenomenal. And they always have every system and accessory in stock when I need them. So go check them out. The link is in the description. But Dylan, what happens if they ban FCC licensing? That only applies to new systems moving forward after December 23rd. Anything already in the US remains unaffected. Think about it. There are over 500,000 DJI drones already in circulation here. They aren't suddenly going to brick themselves at midnight like some Y2K reset button. Historically, the FCC has never retroactively revoked active authorizations, although they did recently gain the power to do so. I'm staying optimistic because grounding 500,000 drones, many of which are still used daily by first responders, would be enormous and an avoidable mistake. So there are really three possible outcomes here. First, the deadline gets extended. The government has pushed deadlines like this before, and it will allow time for an actual security review instead of a default automatic ban. I'm not sure how likely this is, but it's absolutely possible. Second, we could have a similar move to what TikTok did. This year in 2025, TikTok avoided a nationwide US ban by agreeing to a forced divestiture that shifted its American operations into a new US controlled entity with majority American ownership, US-based servers, and oversight from a US board and cloud provider, effectively removing the national security concerns tied to foreign control, while allowing the platform to remain available to US users. DJI could follow a very similar path if it wanted to preserve its long-term presence in the United States by establishing a truly US-based subsidiary with American majority ownership, reallocating data, firmware oversight, and radio communication compliance to US soil, and creating a firewall between the Chinese parent company and all US manufacturing, code, and telemetry systems. A structure like this, mirroring TikTok's divest to remain model, would give the US government the oversight it demands, while allowing DJI hardware to continue operating legally in the American market. I think this would be the smartest play for DJI instead of the ego match that both countries are playing right now, and we get to just be in the middle of it, like little pawns. Lastly, the ban goes through, which means no new DJI systems can be marketed or sold in the United States. This would be devastating, and it is the scenario I hope we don't end up in. It would cripple the US drone industry overnight and create a massive gap that cannot be patched quickly. Look, I believe in our US manufacturers, but the $1,000 to $5,000 price range, where the bulk of private operators live, would still be completely unserved. It's a gap that Skydio could have continued to fill, but that's a discussion for another time. Bottom line, we have a deadline fast approaching. And while I am choosing to stay optimistic, this is the clearest way that I can summarize the major events and what they mean for all of us. This isn't about taking sides. It's about giving you guys a very high-level, fact-based overview of what's happening and why. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this, and honestly, I'd love to hear the optimistic thoughts that you guys have on what's gonna happen on December 23rd. And that's the DJI potential ban explained. If you guys enjoyed, please be sure to give it a like. If you guys wanna see more from me in the future, be sure to subscribe. And like I said, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this entire situation. It is very unfortunate what we're about to walk into, but look, we are pawns in this massive chess game that's being played, and it's being played by very powerful political figures. But the reality is they're looking at the interest of the federal government, not the private sector. And I think that's the biggest issue that we have with this whole thing. And so we're at the mercy of what happens on December 23rd.